Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, How to Speak Like a Boss. We are going to cover communication quirks everyone listening is probably guilty of at least one. And Ron, I was inspired by an article I read by Bridget.Huacin and wanted to expand on the subject because so many well-meaning leaders are unknowingly discrediting themselves by using weak terminology and methods.
It's so true, Kristin, and I'm excited about this, but before we delve into it, I've been asked a lot, and I know you have, about how's the podcast going. So I wanted to do something that's rarely done, I think, and I wanted to share a few stats for those of you that have inquired. We did a post for our internal Facebook group, but Kristin, since we started, which was not that long ago, we've had 1,296 downloads, and that's across the podcast venue. That doesn't include all the listens, it doesn't include YouTube, Rumble. So we're really excited about the growth. We want to thank you. We know that, listen, a podcast doesn't grow without listeners. And so we're really excited and want to extend our gratitude. And we're going to be doing a lot more promotional stuff, but we're off to a great start. How do you feel about that, Kristin?
No, I'm excited. And actually looking at a measuring plate, because I'm sure most people listening want to know where that stacks with other new podcasts. We are in the top 20% of other podcasts that have rolled out around the same time frame we have. So that's pretty exciting that we are in the top 20%. And obviously, Ron and I are both achievers, so we want to be in that top 5% or even lower number. Top 3,
we're taking Joe Rogan down. Rogan, we're coming after you.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. But I'm like, okay, we're not even 90 days in. We'll take top 20 now, but we both want that number to continue to shrink. So pretty exciting, and we just really appreciate everyone being bought into the journey with us.
Okay, now that we've done that, Kristin, I'm going to share a story before we even go into the content of what not to say and things, communication styles to avoid. I'm going to tell you a story, and if you're driving, you may want to pull over because you're going to laugh at me hysterically. Kristin, I know you will as well.
Right.
So here's what happened. I just got promoted, and there was you had 3 levels of employees. You had line instructor, senior instructor, and then you had a higher level management. So if you were in that line officer, there was a certain furniture and office that you got. So the next level was senior level, and they had matching office furniture, and it was on a different floor. So an office came available. I'm sorry, I'm starting to laugh at myself. So I thought, okay, really cool. I'll send out an email. I sent out an email that said, and I only sent it to the group that qualified to move into that office. At least I did that. But I said, this office is available. Let me know if you want it. And I put first come, first serve. It wasn't 60 seconds, I feel like. Someone knocks on my door, opens the door, and says, I want that office. And I said, it's yours. I felt great. Yeah, I just made an employee happy. About hour and a half, 2 hours pass. Someone knocks on my door and says, can I talk with you? They were not smiling. And they said, I wanted that office. I said, well, so-and-so already got it. They said, yeah, you said first come, first serve. I was teaching. Did you want me to take a break and call you? I felt myself getting smaller, Kristin. Yeah. I started sliding under my desk.
Right.
And I'm like, can you imagine? And by the way, this person said, and I've got seniority. I've been on longer than that individual.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh my gosh. So I didn't know what else to do. I said, look, I screwed the pooch on this one. I messed up. If you can just look this over, I'm going to take care of you in another way. And we'll figure something out that, everyone usually got to go to one training per year. I said, I'll let you go to a training you want, or I'll figure this out. And I said, can you do that for me? And they said, yeah. So I ended up sending them to a training that they really wanted to take. Nice. Thank goodness I had the funds and the ability to do that. So it smoothed over. But to this day, it embarrasses me. But that's one of the reasons, Kristin, that I go out and do training, executive coaching, and I know you do as well.
Right.
And that's why I want to do a podcast, because no matter how ridiculous it seems, there's someone else doing it.
Right.
One time I spoke with someone I was coaching. I said, how do you communicate to staff? And this person literally said, I don't. I send an email because I always screw it up.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, ooh, we're going to be starting from square one with this person.
Yeah. Avoidance is not the route.
Kristin, do you still respect me?
I do, Ron. I've made plenty blunders in my day as a leader, and we learn from them. And that's actually, I would say that I just made a bunch of mistakes right there. I said, and I used filler words. We are going to dive into that for those who may have noticed. And I am excited to dive into it because, like I said, everyone on this that is listening has made these mistakes. And I know after Ron and I were prepping for this, we were both completely dissecting ourselves, including the leadership story that Ron just shared. And then I just went down a rabbit hole thinking of all the little mistakes I've made. But as long as we look at it and say we're learning from it and we share what we've learned from it so that folks can avoid doing it themselves, we are doing something right.
That's right. And we name this, using the word boss because it's just a popular phrase. We know, before you start calling in and writing in, we know that the word boss has a negative connotation, but it sure sounds good.
Yeah, it does.
All right, so we're going to start off here. Number one, stop agreeing to everything. It's not possible or conducive. There's some people that just like to avoid conflict in the moment, so they'll just agree, having no intention on following through. So I worked at a place one time early on, and I was new, and I went and asked for something that I needed. So some of the other employees were waiting on me, and they said, what'd he say? I said, he said, I'll check on it. And I was feeling really good, positive.
Yeah.
They said, do you know what his nickname is? I said, no. They said, I'll check on it.
Oh, my gosh.
They literally nicknamed this manager, I'll check on it.
Oh,
they said, you will never hear back. And they were right. So,
wow.
Anyway, yeah. Another thing is some leaders pretend to agree, then sideline their staff when they go back on what they publicly agreed to. I also worked with someone who would agree to something, but then talk to other executives and change course without explaining why. And that became very frustrating for everyone.
Right.
Here's what happens. You send the message that, agendas, like your agenda takes precedence over the team or over anything else. And it just sends the wrong message. Now, we had a submission, and I'm going to tie this in. I think it ties in closely. But there was a small company, and everyone was really overworked in this company. So the head of the company would come in and say, we scored a new contract. And that sounds great. You want your company to succeed. But to the few employees, that only meant more work. So the owner was making a lot more money, but wasn't sharing the fruits of the labor. So then would be frustrated, the leader would be frustrated that the team wasn't as excited as him over the new contract. So
wonder why.
Yeah, wonder why, because their mind is going overtime and his is thinking, here come the Benjamins. So we have to be careful with that as well.
And on the overtime subject, people say, well, they're being paid for it. Not everyone wants to work overtime. Right now, especially, people want a work-life balance. Killing yourself at work is going to do nothing for anyone long-term. Might be a few extra bucks in your pocket. But so I just know some people's minds probably went to, but they're being paid overtime.
Yeah.
Not everyone wants overtime. And I'll tell you what. Every shift my husband works these days for the police officer, law enforcement, they are down 10 people. It's the summer, or almost. Nobody wants to work overtime right now. So that is not always desired.
It's very true. Next is, we are still under the stop agreeing with everything. Standing squarely for any decision, even those they argued against or disagreed with, is a sign of leadership. In other words, sometimes maybe there's some collaboration, discussion, and a leader might say, okay, I think you're right, but then walk out of the room and still do what they wanted to do. And I'm sure everyone listening has probably worked with a leader that way. This, again, is a little bit ancillary to this, But there's a nexus. So there was an employee who was working at a computer all day, and the chair was too high, so they had to slump over. And they asked for a new chair. Someone else decided to change chairs. The leader had orchestrated this, and everything seemed to be working out. A day later, came back and said, this person wants their chair back. Took the chair without explaining. And you know what it made me think of, Kristin?
The Office?
No, it made me think of when you got your radio taken away. I think it was episode 1.
When I was sorting hangers. Horrible.
At Nordstrom. I just wanted you to know I pay attention.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So
wow,
anyway,
that's so bad.
It is. And it's really an act of subversion in your employees' minds. And these are things that leaders have to avoid.
Right.
Also, and this is all along the same lines, but leaders who only pretend to agree to a team's decision, that they've really not trusted the lead. These are integrity. They're about assertiveness. They're about direct communication. And here's what happens. Someone may let you slide on a small issue, but soon you're going to get a reputation that you do not stick with your word. You don't stick with your guns. And then you'll be nicknamed, I'll check on it.
Right. You don't want that.
Or, the subversion king, something like that. And you do not want that to be your title. You are building a reputation every day with every decision. Say what you mean and mean what you say. That old cliche still rings true.
Yes, absolutely. We are going to move on to weak language, and this is something that I've been very cognizant of myself. So this may sound familiar to you. I don't know. I'll try. Instead of that, you want to say, I don't have enough information to answer your question, but I can find out and let you know. Or, that's an excellent question. I'll look into it and get back to you by the end of the day. And do it, right? That's important. When you say, I think this is a good idea, or I believe this could add some value, those are weak statements. And we're all guilty of using weak language at times, but this practice undermines our effectiveness. And it plants seeds of doubts in your audience's mind. And that could be your peers, your employees. So it's really important to identify the situations where you tend to use weak language and understand that depending on what your role is, you could put them on the edge by using this weak language. And I just think back to when I was a bank manager, and I would have employees that would actually flub an answer. I've talked about this before. A client or a customer would ask a question and they didn't know the answer, and they would flub the answer. You can see right through that, and maybe some clients didn't. But what would happen was, instead of saying, I don't have enough information to answer your question, but I'll get back to you with that once I do, then, that right there, so many people are going to be very grateful for you just taking the time to get them the correct answer versus faking an answer. And that's never the way to go. And I know some people do it. Ron, I'm curious if you agree with me on this. People do it because they don't want to feel stupid. They don't want to look weak. And they'll just say what they feel they need to say to save face in the moment.
No, absolutely. I remember the first time I taught financial investigations, I was so uncomfortable. And there was a couple questions came up that I did not have the answer. And that's exactly what I did. Thank goodness. I said, I'm not sure about that, but I will get that. And I'm going to try to get it during the break. Fortunately, a financial expert answered the phone, and I was able to get it during that class.
Nice.
But I do remember thinking, I know that I'm much more respected than if I'd have tried to wing an answer. And by the way, don't underestimate how smart staff really are. You may have someone that's a thought leader, and they know better anyway. But again, it goes back to integrity and assertiveness.
Exactly.
Kristin, let me jump in one other thing here.
Please do.
I coach new leaders, and there's a section in my book called Friend Today, Boss Tomorrow. But in a leadership program that I did, and in my coaching, I teach people how to navigate day one. And frankly, I think usually the first year, the first few months, people are more likely to use this language. And I teach people everything from their posture to eye contact to asking direct questions. One of the ways to show that you're in leadership without being arrogant, but that you are the new leader, is ask specific questions. May I ask why you do it this way? And with eye contact. And as you begin to question, they will begin to respond, and they're going to see you are a leader and you are
Right.
interested in what they're doing, but you're also not afraid to ask direct questions. So
Right.
direct questions is one of the greatest ways to establish yourself as a leader.
Yes, I love that. And some other areas that you want to be aware of. So let's say that you're recognizing that you use weak language. So what you want to start pivoting into, and you're going to have times where you revert back to your weak language. It's a process of making a change. You want to start out with, I know, yada, yada, whatever you want to say, or I'm convinced, or given my experience, I recommend, I suggest, and completely go away from maybe, I believe, I think, kind of, just. And when I'm saying this, you know what's funny? I'm going to listen to this whole podcast back and I'm going to take a tally on what I did. Ron, you can do your own if you want to. If you want to pick yourself apart, go for it. But I think it's really interesting because we can be as well versed and we speak publicly, but we all have areas we can improve upon. And so I think it's really cool to be able to take a chance to dissect yourself a little bit and grow and learn.
That's exactly right. I'm trying to do that. I told Kristin when we started this journey that I felt I was a better public speaker than being on camera, sitting the way we are, doing a podcast. That sometimes it's a struggle, and I look back, I've done the same thing. I'm going to share one in a minute.
Well, it's all about what you're comfortable with and what you do most often. For me, this is what I do most often. I still have plenty that I need to work on, but for you, public speaking is what you've been doing for a long time. And I'm just really pivoting into that space. So naturally, you're going to be more comfortable with and feel that you're stronger in an area that you're practiced. No,
that's true. Or I don't listen to myself when I've gone back to analyze the podcast. You know, it's rare that I'm recorded when I'm doing a public presentation.
That's a big piece too.
It is, and I'm going to explain a really funny story in a minute that will kind of coincide with what I just said.
Yeah, well, I know you're going to talk about filler words, so feel free before or after.
I am. So I'm going to tell the story first. So, by the way, this can be used from leaders communicating. It can be used when you're communicating with your peers. But I used to teach, we had an instructor development course, and we would record that. And it made a big difference because you could listen to yourself. Also, when officers did courtroom testifying, we recorded it. They went in a private room with an instructor, and they analyzed it because you only have a little bit of time to analyze, before another student comes in to testify in court. So we had this individual who's making a presentation, and they literally said, I don't know how many times. And we call those word whiskers.
Okay.
So at the end of it, we're giving feedback, and we allow peers to give feedback to each other, and then the instructor steps in and gives feedback. But they told this individual, you said a lot. And he goes, no, I didn't.
Oh, wow.
And we said, well, yes, you did. It turns out it's recorded, and we didn't want to embarrass. Like this person said, play it, let's play it. So we played it. He said, you're going to love this, Kristin, a 10-minute presentation 118 times.
It's like he was trying to break a record.
He was a good sport about it, but he was almost in floor. He was like covering his face like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that.
Hysterical.
And we were going to stop it because we'd made our point. He goes, no, because these guys are over here keeping a tally.
Oh my
gosh. And they wanted to keep the tally going. So it was
That's
118
something I would
times.
do.
I will never, ever forget that.
Oh my goodness. Well, why don't I out myself real quick here, Ron, and then you can just have the floor. I spoke at an engagement this past Friday, and it was a 7-minute speech, and I said, so when I was transitioning, I didn't realize how many times I did it. Now, I did it 5 times because I listened to the playback of my speech. But 5 times to say so, it actually started bothering me. Of course, I'm going to be hypersensitive because I'm very critical of myself. But it seemed quite excessive. And now I'm aware of it. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get over that hurdle. I thought I was doing a good job at avoiding and or but so wow.
So, Kristin.
So So, Ron, the floor is yours now that I've outed myself.
When Kristin and I were prepping, I wanted to bring like totally back.
Yes.
Anyway.
Totes.
So I just did so. Now I can't even speak, Kristin. Thank you. Take over.
I know. I don't know if I just, as I'm talking, I'm completely tallying myself.
Since we started this podcast, every time I make a statement, I go, was that something a narcissist would say?
You have to go back to that episode for those
Here's
who
some
are
of the
not
filler
aware.
words. Here's some of the filler words.
Fillers.
So. I think you just heard about that one.
Yep.
You know. Now, Kristin, one of us says that a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm going to out you completely. I'm going to let people know the type of co-host that I have.
Oh, my gosh.
So Kristin put these notes together. I didn't even pull these from my instructor development. So I'm going through it, and it says, and I'd already, last episode I listened, and I'm like, oh, my gosh, I keep saying Anyway, this is parentheses. I didn't do this. It says, Ron. This is what I'm supposed to say. I'm doing air quotes if you're listening. I'm guilty of this. Thank you, Kristin.
You are so welcome, just in case you weren't aware.
There's nothing better. Kristin, there's nothing better than peer-to-peer feedback.
Yes. So
I was going to do that. I do appreciate that. I always try to be open to feedback. And someone else gave me some feedback. And it just, gosh... Now I'm struggling.
Just live your life, Ron. Just
be me.
Just be you. Oh.
This is one that's so popular. Like we could add totally to it, but it became these catchphrases that people people are like sheep that just goes on and on. Like, right. Totally, like, and then right. People love to ask it. I worked with someone. They would say right after every sentence, and it made you feel like they were too tentative or what do they want? But you knew it's just a habit. It's an annoying habit, really, but
yes.
Right? And this is another one that I've done a lot. Well, or I used to use the old word whelp. That was a cool Appalachian term that I use. Whelp, nice. I don't know. And then there's crutch words. And the crutch words commonly occur is they give us a minute to collect our thoughts before we press on. It's anything that makes you comfortable. But let me say this. It's okay to just pause. Yes. And that's one of the things we taught in the instructor development course, that there's nothing wrong. Now, if you pause too long, then that's a problem. When we recorded people, we started noticing a theme. And we're not going to get into body language on this, but I do want to do that at some point, Kristin. Yes. But we called it it was the figure eight. And seriously, people would either rock back and forth while they're talking. We had people that jiggled things in their pocket. But we started seeing a figure eight as people were walking. And they would do the exact same pattern. At first, it looks comfortable, but then you start to realize this person's doing a figure eight. Any of these things, I know you may not be standing up talking to staff or to a peer, but imagine if we thought about the way we speak if we're going to give a speech. Now, I'm not talking to be robotic, but if we took it as seriously as when we have to give a talk, when we're communicating with staff or communicating with each other, we would probably improve. I plan to improve as the podcast progresses, and we'll see if I do that.
You will. I know. I almost feel like I was empowered when we started this run, and now I'm like, what am I supposed to say? I'm out of words, but...
It is
what it is.
We're going to continue on. Data shows the average person uses one filler word per minute. That's the average person. I like to always think I'm above average.
Of course you do.
I probably use more
than that.
You are,
Ron.
Yeah. Thank you, Kristin.
You're welcome.
And see what else we got. To get your message across effectively, you have to keep your audience engaged. And when you use those excessive filler words, and we've talked about acronyms. I was in a place one time where someone used so many acronyms, we're counting them. I forgot what they even talked about. Yeah. And that's what happens when you're using too many filler words. People start thinking about it.
Right.
Kristin, we try to be open here, vulnerable. This was the feedback I got from episode 1. I kept saying in a future episode, in a later episode, let's talk about this in another episode. So that was brought to my attention. I have a couple of friends. Believe me, they spare me no misery. and they let me know what I'm saying.
Those are the best kind, seriously, because they're, generally speaking, they're coming from the right place, and we want that feedback.
It was true, and frankly, I'd already seen that, but certainly I took the constructive feedback for sure. The key, and I tell people this even in writing when I taught as a professor, accuracy, brevity, and clarity.
Right.
When I coach people, and I'm guilty of this, going down rabbit holes. I tell people, and Kristin, you're going to love this. If you do not know someone that well, use fewer words. It's okay to ramble with your friends a little bit, right? But if you're talking to an executive somewhere, or you're not that comfortable, you don't know someone's personality style, you're better off to just be clear and logical. Accuracy, brevity, clarity. Right. And it will serve you much better until you get a read on somebody's personality types.
That's big right there.
I wanted to make my own mistake and say, we'll get into that in another episode, but I'm going to avoid that, Kristin.
Oh, no, that's big. It really is. And you think about, I know the next topic that we'll be talking on is slowing down the speed at which you speak. For me, I had an employee who would speak so fast because she had so much going on in her life. I would just be wanting to, let's catch up and have a one-on-one. And it was like word vomit, but it was coming at me out of fire hose speed. And I said, I'm going to give you a little feedback here. You need to slow down because you're completely discrediting yourself. When somebody speaks so fast, you're going to lose focus on what they're even talking about. You're going to grow agitated. And then you're going to start to question whether they're all put together up there. At least that's what I do. It makes me think, wow, like what is going on upstairs that you have to spew this at me at this rapid pace? And so I said something not very proud of, but apparently she's given me 5 or 6 plus different times. She's given me kudos on this. I said, slow down and speak like a Kardashian, which they're not my favorite people. But if you think about it, they do speak quite slow, maybe too slow, but you can hear everything they're saying and they're all quite successful. And so for somebody that's doing the complete opposite, she says she reminds herself of that regularly when she's speaking to people. So good or bad, it's helping her.
Kristin, in terms of the Kardashians, can we take out the whiny part at the end of each statement? That part.
Oh, yeah. I haven't watched it in so long.
Yeah, sure. That's great advice. I do remember in meetings, I had a few people that would ramble on, and I would say, okay, let's get back to the point here. I would try to do it nicely, maybe even with a smile, but we have to get back on track.
Right, exactly. Yeah, speaking too fast, it can create a negative impression, and it can make what you're saying appear salesy. You think of like the sleazy, I hate to say used car salesman because I actually know one and he's a class act. And used cars right now, those are a hot commodity, folks. But, the quintessential slicked back hair used car salesman, when you speak too fast, people can feel like you're trying to sell them something, trying to pull the wool over their eyes, right? And so that's a negative, and you want to really step away from that. And you can have a well thought out and beautifully crafted message for your presentation, but if you speak too fast, your audience is going to completely miss out on it. Something else at the other end of the spectrum, talking fast can be perceived as nervousness or lacking confidence. So people prone to talking fast may be perceived as not knowing what they're talking about. And it's as though they're rushing through their message because they feel uneasy. Talking too fast is the opposite of a composed leadership presentation or presence. So we don't want you to lose your listeners' attention or lose the clarity of your message. And this happened to me on Friday when I was speaking. I don't think I was talking too fast, but I didn't eat anything all day and then went to do this speaking presentation. And I could feel my heart rate. Well, it went up fast because I knew I was next to speak. So it was very rapid heart rate. And then when I started speaking, it slowed way down. And it says here that if you speak too fast or have a sudden change, you can reduce your oxygen to where you feel like you're going to pass out. And that actually happened to me for a minute where I felt really wibbly wobbly. And I was like, I made a few speaker, poor moves of not drinking water and not eating anything before my speaking engagement. And we could have had Kristin passed out on the floor at that one. But all of these things are important. We don't think about all of this before we go in and speak, even in front of a small group. Have you ever had that happen to you, Ron?
Kristin, on my online leadership course, I'll give a plug there.
Yeah.
I actually teach strategies to build courage. That was something, you're talking about a guy who was competing in martial arts tournaments and hated to speak in public. I would much rather fight you than speak to you.
Yeah.
And I had to learn, take steps. And you just talked about a few of the things you can do, but also practicing, being succinct. Those kind of things help. But yeah, I had a whole ritual when I first started doing public speaking. I had a whole ritual that I would go through because I did not like it. As a matter of fact, in the senior play, my aunt, God rest her soul, she was over the senior play. And I came up with an idea. I did not want to be in that play, and I happened to be playing in a rock band. And I persuaded her that we would play during intermission. We had to do Eagles tunes. We couldn't do anything, too outlandish. Yeah. But she agreed, because I explained to her that by the time I left the stage with my huge part that I was sure to get, that it would be hard for me to get my guitar tuned. I made up this whole story to avoid being in the senior play. Now I love the arts. I love to go to plays. If I could go back at it, I would have done both.
Right.
But it's amazing, and people will go to extremes to avoid the things they're afraid of.
Right.
And Kristin, as a side note, I tell everyone, we all come up to a wall of fear in our lives. You either chip away or walk away, and your destiny is on the other side of that wall.
Yes.
So I'm going to encourage people who are listening, we're having fun here, but take these things seriously. Don't allow the fact you do not like to public speak to thwart your career, because that's what would have happened to me. If I had not taken that on, I would have never gotten to the place I got in my career. Right.
No, that's great advice. Absolutely. The next we're going to cover is I feel statements. I can go ahead and take
Kristin,
this one, Ron.
Take those.
Because you're going to tackle the next one. That's a big one. All right. So I feel statements. I'm going to go into it, but you're probably saying to yourself, do I say that? Well, it's okay to say it when you're in a relationship with somebody. This is specific to the workplace. It's very important to use I feel statements. I wanted to say that in a marriage, in a relationship, when you're speaking to family, friends, that is okay. But when you're in a business setting, I statements are necessary in your personal relationships, but they're a no-go in business. So I feel frustrated that you missed the budget deadline twice. So in most cases, I statements are more likely to undercut your argument than to strengthen it. And they can be seen as expressions of emotionalism, particularly when they're used by women. And that's just the cold, hard truth, is that women generally get labeled more emotional. And, I don't want to say, maybe they are. I don't know. I kind of consider myself like lacking in the emotional area. So I might be the exception, or that the statement that women are more likely to use that may be wildly incorrect. But women in general do get labeled as more emotional. And there was also a study that I read that members of the BIPOC community also seem to get that label as well. And so that's interesting. So we want to be mindful of it when we're communicating, so that we don't get falsely labeled with you're too emotional, or they're coming from emotions, not facts, right? So just something to be thoughtful about.
Kristin, if I could interject, I wrote about this. I call it emotional leadership. I didn't make it gender-based, but you're exactly right. That is a consensus that's gone on for years. And women are breaking some stereotypes for sure in today's world, but those are things that women have been labeled to do. But emotional statements, this is a way that people can find out if they're too emotional. What happens is when your emotions gets attached, you will exaggerate. How many of you have heard this before? You never do this. Or
my husband hates when I do that to him.
Or you always do it this way. And you have to break that down. They never call you back, never one time in the history of the world. So that's what happens as well, is when you get your emotions attached, you'll tend to exaggerate, you'll tend to get off base. And you got to avoid that as a leader. But also, although you want personal relationships, don't get me wrong, you want to build that camaraderie with staff, you are speaking on behalf of the company. So it's not about you. I used to we used to call them comptrollers, that's your procurement specialist. And back in the day, they were called comptrollers. When I would approve something to be purchased, they would go down to the procurement person and they would start to argue, I don't see why you need this. So I had to tell them, this is not coming out of your personal checking account. I approve this, approve it. And I think that that's in line with what you're talking about.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So, Ron, I know you're going to tackle this next one.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I have a story for everyone.
Oh, good. You want to avoid disclaimers and tentative words. This may sound like silly, but if you say it's just my opinion instead of based on my experience, which you've already mentioned, or my idea for this is, it does elevate you. It makes people realize you're contributing to the conversation. You're not tentative. Trust me, tentative people never really grow in their leadership, and they're never truly respected. They're not admired, and they can't cast the vision the way they should. Now, you already mentioned this, Kristin, and I hope people understand that we're going based off of statistics here. But the stats show, and again, this may be changing, but that men communicate in a more assertive manner. And it's probably because they have occupied those dominant positions in societal hierarchy. When I used to teach at a university, you have active and passive voice, and it was not uncommon. Men in the class would use short, choppy, assertive statements. The stapler is under the desk, period. And females in the class would use in prepositions, it would be like, under the desk is the stapler. And I saw a pattern when I was correcting people's writing, and it would be men. Now, it's probably because they don't have the vocabulary. Can some of the women say amen? But they would do the simple, assertive, direct statements. So in the studies, it does say that women are more tentative and they're more polite when they communicate. They may be more prone to take a subordinate position. And women are also prone to use this statement, I'm not sure if this is right, but, and then they go into what they're saying. I want to encourage the females. I do think stereotypes are being broken, but if you hold that position, you are the leader. And I am providing coaching right now, executive coaching, with someone who is a female and everyone else is males in this organization. And there are some challenges. So we're actually working on some of this language to help her be more assertive, more respected. And it's working. It's working.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That is big. I think step one is just being aware of it, and then knowing what tools that you're going to need to be successful. I said I would out myself on this one. So what happened was this morning, actually, I was on a planning call. I'm part of a planning committee for a local organization, and we're putting together a whole list of big name speakers that are coming to town. So I'm on this planning committee. There's only 3 of us. So it's a very intimate phone call. And clearly they see something in me if they want me to be one of 3 in planning this. But I undercut myself because when I was asked my position on something, I said, now I'm not the expert in this area, but, and I gave my opinion. And I kicked myself. I didn't say anything, but I kicked myself because though I'm not the expert, I am one of 3, and I have been asked to plan this huge event. And clearly I have weight with them. My opinion carries weight with this group of people. So what I said was completely unnecessary because I wouldn't have even made it into this circle of 3 if they didn't already value my opinions and my thoughts on matter. Kristin. That was this whole cycle, right? This all went through my mind in the span of 30 seconds.
If you are still listening and you don't take anything else, take that. That is so profound, so simple, and it's so true. I've seen that play out over and over. What you should have said is, JK, I am the expert. But anyway. I
write this line of, I don't want to be a phony, right? You don't want to, the whole thing, fake it till you make it. You want to be really careful, but you can give your opinion without being the SME, the subject matter expert, right? You can give your opinion because of all of your other expertise and experiences along the way. So,
Kristin, I don't want to get too much in depth here, but I could always tell, usually, when an employee had worked for a tyrant, they would be so tentative to even express opinions or give an idea. And I would always meet with that person, try to look at the trauma that was involved surrounding that, and try to get them to be more assertive. It's okay to express your opinion. You went to college. You got this job. And I used to always say, I would tell staff, we're the greatest federal law enforcement agency in the country. I would say that in graduations. And I would tell the staff, you're the best staff of any office in the country in our division. And I believe that translated some. Now, I had someone call me on it and said, we've got some duds. Why would you say that? And I said, let me ask you a question. Do you think, when you look at Chicago Bulls, they had Michael Jordan, but everyone contributed. And because of speaking that greatness, watching that greatness, people began to elevate. I said, if I go in and go, you are 90% great staff, but 10% of you are duds. I said, I don't think that's going to take us to the next level. No. So that was my opinion on that. And your opinion mattered and was correct, I would say. Good. Glad we got that out there. So you guys have seen that I'm human quite a bit on this podcast episode. Ron as well. Thank you for your vulnerability, Ron. Yeah. All right. I'm going to wrap this up with number 7, which is honestly statements. So when you say honestly as part of your response, was everything else you said a lie? That's what's going to go through the minds of listeners. It's harmful and disempowering. Why? Because it's a verbal clutch that many use to soften the blow of a strong opinion. So that shows the lack of, basically, I would say it's almost like you're insecure. If you're going to say, honestly, that does water down your statement. So it's projecting a complete lack of confidence. People want to follow and believe in someone that they feel is confident. And studies have shown that confidence matters more to people than competence. So confidence matters more to people than competence. Just think about that for a second. That's really powerful. So again, the honestly statements weaken the message, and people can start to think about imposter syndrome, which is a whole other thing that we should dive into sometime, which is common among high-achieving women. And I don't know if you're well-versed on that, Ron. I do think we should go into all of the dilemmas that women in the workplace face on another episode. I think that's completely something we should be tackling. But imposter syndrome is like, why am I here? How did I get here? Am I worthy of being here? All these things go through the minds of high-achieving women. Absolutely. I did a post on the imposter syndrome. I was in a doctor's coat a few weeks ago. And, yes, you did. I did. I should have remembered that. I was starting to wonder if you read it, Kristin. I need you to go back and like it. My feelings are hurt. Yes. So this information is so solid. I know it may not be as great as some of the prison stories that we told, but if you will apply some of the things, this can work. This is so cool to me. One of the greatest testimonials I ever got from my book was from a stay-at-home mother who said she's using some of the principles with her children, and they were effective. Love it. No matter what we're talking about here, relationships and other parts of your life, business and volunteer organizations, the things we've talked about today will help you. It will make you more confident as a leader, and you'll be able to communicate effectively. And that should be the goal. The information you bring out, you want it to be received in the manner that you present it. And that's one of the keys. And Chris and I used to have a saying that I would tell a few of my employees that lack some confidence. I would always say, confidence is a magnet. Yes. And I use that over and over, and they begin to see just how true that is. And you're right, people will take confidence over competency, which in some cases leads people astray. Yes, but it's just human nature. We follow confidence.
Yes, we do.
And I first started realizing when social media hit the scene that you could literally go out on a camera and look confident and say, these 3 things will change your lives. And people going, yep, that's it. That's going to change my life no matter what.
Absolutely.
But it is very true.
Yes.
Phew.
All right. Excellent.
This has been fun.
It's a lot of information, but like Ron said, very valuable, and it needs to be applied. And don't beat yourself up if you use a few filler words like you've witnessed us doing. I'm like, so dang it.
Kristin, I was going to end this by saying, let's give each other one free filler word.
Thank you. I want right. I noticed I say that a lot on this podcast. Right.
You know, I can't think of one.
All right. Granted. You get, I get right.
It's been fun, Kristin.
Yes, it has. All right. Well, we'll see everybody next week. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe, rate, share us out, find us on social. We want you to tell us what you want to hear in future episodes.
Be the leader you're meant to be.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.